Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, How IOP Publishing Simplified User Access to IOPscience. I'm Jane Charlton, International Marketing Manager at OpenAthens, and I will be your host for today. So I just want to give a bit of background to the topic of today's webinar and why this work is so important to you, your learners and researchers. One of the biggest complaints that librarians tell us about is poor user experience on publisher websites. Complicated user journeys lead to barriers to content and frustration for learners and researchers who then turn away from quality peer-reviewed content that you are providing. OpenAthens Wayfinder and the SeamlessAccess service were developed to improve user access to subscribed online resources. So later on, we'll hear from Matt Keane at IOP Publishing, who will share the results of a successful collaboration to test integration of these two services. We see this work as vitally important because it will help to increase use of subscribed content. Learners and researchers are less likely to get in touch with their library or publisher about problems with accessing content. And they're also more likely to use the quality peer-reviewed content that their library provides. And with increased usage, libraries will also see a greater return on their investment from sometimes shrinking budgets. And now I'd like to welcome today's speakers. So we have Heather Staines, who is the publisher outreach contact for SeamlessAccess, Jake Smallridge, Product Manager at OpenAthens, and Matt Keane, Product Manager and for Access and Entitlement at IOP Publishing. And I will now hand over to Heather.
Okay, so as Jane mentioned, I'm Heather Staines. I've been working with SeamlessAccess since the fall of 2020 on publisher outreach and engagement opportunities. So what I'm going to do today is give just a quick introduction to SeamlessAccess. And as Jane mentioned, we can take questions at the end. And we also have Heather Flanagan, who's been running point on the project. So if your questions stray into the overly technical side, I may have to punt to her. Our goals for today are the what and the why around SeamlessAccess, terminology and dependencies, what you need to have going in order for SeamlessAccess to get going and work properly. A little bit of what we've learned and our ongoing activities, how you can participate, and a quick snapshot of the upcoming roadmap. So why implement SeamlessAccess? Jane mentioned poor user experience as one of the main reported challenges. I know I've experienced it myself, trying to get access to content that I know I have access to. So when we're looking at SeamlessAccess, you'll probably notice these drop-down screens, find your institution, log in, different pathways. With SeamlessAccess, information about the user's institution is saved in the local browser. Trusted service providers are able to access that. We'll be talking a little bit about security later. And when everything runs seamlessly, then the number of times a user has to search for their institution and authenticate should be reduced. So now what is SeamlessAccess? A coalition of 4 founding organizations are responsible for SeamlessAccess. You see them here: NISO, STM, Internet2, and JAUNT. And overall, it is a community effort to make sure that we can develop robust information resources, collaboration tools, and a research infrastructure that will be sustainable into the future. The goals for SeamlessAccess, we want to make sure that that user experience is top-notch when they're not on campus. And as many of you no doubt experienced, that has been the norm over the past 14, 15 months. So it's become even more critical than it was prior. We want to make sure that identity federation infrastructure will continue to be developed, that standards continue to be developed. And this will also improve the campus response to security incidents around unauthorized access, and it should limit site-wide disruption that's caused by individual abuse. On your screen, you see the implementers that are live today. We've got a few more who are on deck, but they're not quite there yet, but they should be soon. So you can see there on the left, I do have a little bit of information about the center column on the level of integration. We will be, I believe, sharing these slides. And so in the slides, you can actually click through an example URL and see what that implementation looks like. And we'll be seeing a little bit from IOP about their implementation. So in order for seamless access to work, the institution must have SAML service, and a library must request the publisher to enable them on that publishing platform. So in turn, the publisher must have SAML as well, and the publisher then must implement seamless access. The user will authenticate through SAML when they're on a publisher platform that has seamless access enabled. And as long as they're in the same browser on the same device, that authentication should be persistent and will work across the enabled platforms. So this has been underway for a while now, and we are learning from our implementation partners. And some of that user experience, which I think is available on our documentation site of our website, tells us a few key things. The more options a user is presented with, the less likely they're going to know what to do, and their journey forward will not be clear. Placement of the seamless access button really, really matters. We realize that this is, you know, it's an issue on publisher platforms. It's a real estate issue that needs to be negotiated internally, but we can't emphasize enough that the placement of the button really matters. Details on the language or on the button matter. What we're hoping to do is train users that when they click seamless access, there will be a certain pathway forward for them. So deviation from that pathway does not help with that training process. We have a number of working groups underway in conjunction with seamless access. There's the WAIF entry disambiguation working group, which is the where are you from, which kicked off, I think, earlier this year. We have the contract language working group, which has been around a bit longer. The outreach committee, which is very active and helped us with some of our planning around today. And I will draw your attention on our website. There is a new use case about the importance of when there are multiple institutions that might have the same name in the drop-down menu, and how that can be confusing for users, and what to do in that regard. We also have an advisory committee that consists of representatives from publishers, from libraries, from aggregators, and from some of the founding members of Seamless Access as well. So what's up next in terms of the roadmap? We're continually working to improve the UX, and that goes for both the standard implementation and for advanced, which enables customizations. We're working on internationalization. That's a question that comes up frequently. We're spending a lot of time looking at the IDP filtering and notification. And that is, giving the user the options when they're looking for their institution, when they need to add an institution, change an institution, and the like, and that whole process. And then we have a lot of testing underway with integrators, and we want to make sure that we can understand and respond to browser behavior changes, which is an important part of the ecosystem that we all depend upon for things online to just work. I mentioned the security around seamless access. There had been some chatter maybe about a month ago about security of SAML authentication. So we did posting on the Scholarly Kitchen, and we've made efforts to just get out in front of this. Seamless access itself does not use the keys that are exchanged between the identity provider, the service provider, and the federation operator. just to highlight, SeamlessAccess is not itself an identity provider or a service provider. We just support the discovery process. We're about what the user is going to see in that drop-down menu, what the language is going to be around that, and the persistence of that authentication. There are no attributes that are exchanged as part of this process. And when we work with service providers, the terms of service are very, very strict, that they need to be part of a federation. And we rely on those federations that have established trust and security over time, because they are the ones who are using industry best practices around those keys being exchanged. And if you have more detailed questions around security, I can ask my colleague Heather Flanagan to jump in. That's it from me today, and I look forward to taking any questions you may have later.
Thank you, Heather. And now we will hand over to Jake.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for that great overview there, Heather, of SeamlessAccess and what they do. I'm here to really give a bit of an intro to what work we've done at OpenAthens with SeamlessAccess before Matt then goes through a little bit more detail the implementation that they've done specifically. So as you can see from Heather's presentation, SeamlessAccess has done loads and loads of great work to develop new functionality and really raise the importance of user experience within the industry. As a result of the success of SeamlessAccess, lots of our customers have been talking to us over the last 12 months about how they can start to use the SeamlessAccess functionality, and especially how they can use that alongside the existing OpenAthens products that they're already using, such as our Wayfinder product that helps users to easily find their institution when looking to sign in. So in conversation with SeamlessAccess, we realized there's a really, really big opportunity here for us to integrate our two products together for the benefit of all of our customers. This integration means that our publisher customers can get set up with SeamlessAccess really simply and easily, and leaving the back-end work for us to handle, which means they can focus on how to deliver the best experience on their site with the SeamlessAccess tools. To bring that integration to life a little bit, really quickly, you can see on the top left here that the OpenAthens Wayfinder product, which users use to find their institution to authenticate, we've integrated that product with SeamlessAccess so that if enabled, any institution selected will be then remembered by SeamlessAccess and then appear on the SeamlessAccess button at the bottom right there on any website where that's hosted. And to enable that integration, all the publishers will need to do is flick a switch within our product to enable it. And this means that all publishers need to do is implement that button, that SeamlessAccess button on their site, and it will just work seamlessly with the Wayfinder, which means that publishers can focus on creating the best experience possible for their users and making sure that that SeamlessAccess button sits on their website and fits into a really nice user journey without needing to worry about any of the technical integrations. So there's just kind of a really quick view, and I'm sure Matt will bring it to life even more in a minute, but that's a really quick overview of what that integration between OpenAthens and SeamlessAccess means. And I say by using this approach, we enable our customers to focus on the experience for their users on their site and leaving the technical bits to us. Just a kind of little, well, I guess, a little plug and a little heads up, the functionality we aim to have available to all of our publisher customers in the next couple of weeks. So we're really excited to get that out there and get that out to everyone. Now we've had a successful trial with IOP. And if you're interested in finding out more about this work and are an OpenAthens customer who's interested in SeamlessAccess, then feel free to get in touch. And that's my email address there on the screen, jake.smallridge@openathens.net. And we're definitely keen to have those conversations with our customers about how they can get it implemented and how to do that in the best way possible for their users. So I'll just really kind of quick overview of what we've done at OpenAthens to get that integration set up. And I'll now hand over to Matt to go into a little bit more detail.
Okay, so thank you, Jake and Jane, for giving me the opportunity to talk about essentially the pathway that we took, the journey that we took towards wanting to implement seamless access on our content platform, IOPscience, and essentially talk about the impact that we can clearly see that it's made in terms of enhancing the user access experience on our content platform. So, as a publisher, we've been supporting federated authentication, shibboleth OpenAthens, based on how it's implemented for well over sort of 15 years now, alongside IP-based access methods such as VPN and proxy. And that's been very much in response to sort of customer need of supporting remote access for our institutional subscribers as a means of serving the more mobile researcher and their wish to sort of access content from anywhere, whether that's from home, whilst commuting on planes and trains, and from coffee shops. So the adoption of federated authentication on our content platform, IOPscience, essentially was very slow in the first few years. I think up to 2014, we were only supporting 7 federations and their respective member institutions. So the UK, French, German, Japanese, and the OpenAthens Federation being amongst that sort of select group. And we integrated with the Interfederation Service EduGain in 2014 to make it easier for our institutional customers to sort of connect with us in supporting federated authentication. And that certainly had the desired effect, giving us sort of the capability to enable this access method on our platform for institutions across the globe in various national federations from China to Australia to Brazil. However, despite that, despite sort of, the efforts and sort of increasing adoption, the growing level of sort of global appetite from university institutions wasn't really being reflected in the underlying demand that we were seeing from researchers based on the low levels of usage via this access method. So before 2019, federated authentication only accounted for less than 0.3% of all of the requests that were being generated on IOPscience. So given the sort of increasing library adoption rates, but low demand from the actual end user, we set about a sort of strategic plan to deliver improvements in that federated authentication user experience on our content site. And essentially, it was a means of making that pathway more attractive to researchers and essentially remove the friction that was behind that customer resistance. So in a world where technology is changing at a pace and we recognize that there was a need for a more sort of robust and reliable access solution to ensure that we are very much sort of maximizing our audience potential. So we focused on addressing the where are you from experience to make it easier for researchers to be able to choose their home organization in order to log in. So we were one of sort of the first publishers to work with OpenAthens to adopt their where are you from technology, which is known as the Wayfinder, whereby through this particular service, a user's search automatically covers all the sort of known identity federations a publisher is a member of, without the user needing to be aware of them. One of the other sort of core benefits of this particular functionality is it introduced geolocation, and essentially it sort of simplified the search functionality, enabling people to basically find easier ways to be able to get access through their home organization and using their single sign-on login credentials accordingly. So what we learned when we learned of sort of the new initiative, Seamless Access, this for us was very much sort of an exciting opportunity to make further enhancements to that sort of user access experience and really sort of strengthen our commitment to delivering smooth access to the research that we publish, particularly in light of the fact that remote access has become even more important as a customer need, given the impact of the pandemic. So we recognize that we're very much part of a sort of single sign-on ecosystem through supporting federated authentication, but the experience that we're offering still had plenty of opportunity for improvement. So Seamless Access was our opportunity to address those pain points that may have still been discouraging researchers from using this pathway to our content. So this slide here shows what the federated authentication experience looked like on IOPscience prior to our implementation of Seamless Access, whereby the visual cues weren't clear. There were unnecessary steps or pages in the user journey, and the terminology that was being used was very much sort of inconsistent and not at all user-friendly as in the way that we would ideally like. So the key components that we delivered on IOPscience in order to support not just the Seamless Access service itself, but the very sort of principles behind it, these are as follows. So the first one was very much creating some clear signposting. And that was achieved through the implementation of the Seamless Access button on our paywall page. So adopting as a recognizable visual cue to researchers that they will then experience on other participating publisher content platforms that basically let the user know, okay, I can seamlessly access content through my institution. So the first time a user navigates to IOPscience from a discovery search and the user hasn't already sort of authenticated themselves through their home organization because they may be off campus, they can now see that sort of clear signposting that says access through your institution. The second core deliverable was persistence. So this would ensure a user's institution selection would be persisted in their user browser, not just on our content platform, IOPscience, but across all the various participating publisher sites. So again, should a user navigate to IOPscience from, say, a discovery search, and the user hasn't already authenticated themselves through their home organization because they're off their network, if they have selected their institution through that where are you from process, either on IOPscience or on another Seamless Access participating site, their selection is remembered. In other words, it basically sort of presents your previously used institution as the first option, removing the need to repeat that institutional selection process when moving from one participating platform to another. So if I'm a researcher, every other time I've gone through that search process, the button changes to say access through the name of my chosen institution. The third was removing unnecessary steps or clicks in that access pathway. So we achieved this by removing a page that you can see here that the user had to navigate through before searching and selecting their institution through the Wayfinder. And finally, we normalized the language in our signposting, very much to remove the inconsistency in the language that we were using, which was more sort of technically orientated terminology like shibboleth, like OpenAthens, as a means of eliminating such friction in that user access experience. So that effectively explains what we delivered through our implementation of Seamless Access and essentially sort of how we integrated with the OpenAthens Wayfinder service. But what impact has this actually had? And usage data and usage is effectively sort of the best ways of sort of understanding this. And through the OpenAthens dashboard, we do have the ability to sort of monitor activity through federated authentication. So we can quickly see a significant increase in the number of logins being generated on IOPscience post-implementation, which was, in our case, the 15th of March, 2021. So the graph here shows the sort of consistent increase in logins since that implementation date, whereby the dips that you could see, they're very much weekends when obviously there would be less demand to our content. So there was clear evidence of the sort of positive impact that Seamless Access was having in making the sort of federated authentication user experience far more sort of attractive to our researchers. However, we were very much sort of eager to understand what that impact actually looked like more from sort of geographical perspective. So we have the means to understand usage at an institutional level, as in the sort of request to our content via federated authentication. Like I said, we can apply that at an institutional level, so it gave us the ability to sort of understand what's going on at a sort of more sort of regional country level. So using that capability, we were able to get an insight into sort of how many requests were being generated via federated authentication at a country level. So the numbers that are being represented here, I should explain, these are counter these are aligned to counter sort of standard metrics. So these represent total item requests, and they're to all of our resources on IOPscience, which comprises of full text journal articles as well as books and chapters. So we focused on just 2021 usage only in understanding the impact of seamless access on IOPscience by comparing usage via federated authentication from the beginning of this year to the 14th of March with the numbers that were then generated subsequently from the 15th of March up to, in this case, it was early May 2021. So you may be thinking, well, why did we do that? Why just 2021? And the reason for that is because we felt that analysing usage for this year would give us a truer indication of impact than comparing with previous years, where numbers would be more influenced by the adoption rate of federated authentication on IOPscience than the changes that we've actually made to the user experience through seamless access. So although we continually see more institutions adopt federated authentication on IOPscience, the rate hasn't been anywhere near as significant as what we saw in 2020, when there was such a surge of adopters at the start of the pandemic, as libraries looked to improve their capability in better serving their patrons get off-campus access to publisher resources. So comparing 2021 usage pre versus post seamless access implementation on the 15th of March on IOPscience, we've essentially seen an 82% increase in total item requests to our content generated via federated authentication. But I appreciate there's a need to contextualize that in terms of all of the usage that we see on our content platform and all the various authentication methods that are used. So to contextualize that, essentially federated authentication, it made up 4% of all usage on IOPscience, and it's since now risen to 6% since we implemented seamless access. So those numbers will include all of those countries that have yet to get more involved in adopting federated authentication, for example, like Russia and Mexico. So this isn't just looking, focusing on those institutions that use this particular access method. You can see that if we start to examine impact regionally, we can see that it's had a significant impact on usage via federated authentication, very much in the US, with a 176% increase in usage since we implemented seamless access. And that 8% of all usage in this region now comes from this access method, which was a rise from 3% prior to launch. And we can see very much similar outcomes in Canada, Australia, and Italy, where again, there's a higher adoption of federated authentication, and where this usage now, via this sort of access method, now accounts for a much sort of greater proportion of overall usage. And it's really also clear evidence to us that the benefits of, the benefit that seamless access has had in sort of delivering, and more essentially sort of changing, I suppose, the way that users are now behaving on our content platform, and the way they go about accessing our resources. I'd like to call to your attention that we haven't seen that trend everywhere, interestingly. So Japan seems to be something of a bit of an outlier there. So despite sort of high library adoption, the numbers seem to have dropped. And I guess our sort of theory on that one is that we would imagine that students and researchers in that particular region probably rely more heavily on discovering content through their virtual libraries. So as a consequence, they may be using more IP-based methods to get off-campus access, either through sort of VPN and proxy. But overall, we can clearly see that it's continuing to have, see a significant benefit for us, evidenced through the usage numbers that we're seeing. And it is clearly sort of showing that it's delivering an easy to use access experience that's very much sort of akin to what we encounter on the sort of consumer web when using sort of Facebook or Google accounts or something like that, as a means of sort of helping to sort of reduce the barrier that is getting access. Okay, thank you. I'll hand you back to Jane.
Thank you, Matt. Very interesting talk, and I think we will go to questions now. So there's been a few people that have been basically answering questions. I just thought it would be great to actually talk through these so that everyone can hear what the questions and the answers are. So the first question I can see is from Frank, and he says, will portals like Google Scholar integrate with this so a user is directed to the full text, or will one still need to establish the library link submenu with Google Scholar? And Heather Flanagan has actually answered this question. So Heather, I don't know if you would be happy to take the mic and to answer it.
Sure. As folks can probably tell, we had a little bit of confusion with the links of logging in. So I've been pretending to be Heather Staines for a while as I was answering questions.
Hey, I wish I was that smart. So thank you.
So Google Scholar is following a very different path to getting people access to content. They're using something called the Campus Activated Subscriber Access, or CASA, which you all may have heard of. And what CASA does is, and I'm not an expert on CASA in any way, shape, or form, but my understanding is that when a user logs in to a campus that is supporting CASA, then that login is viable for a certain set of time. I think it's usually a week. And then people, as they go search, will be able to just get straight to their material because Google will have recorded what they did. That's, as far as I know, Google has no plans whatsoever to switching to a more traditional federated access model, and so would not be using seamless access at all.
Thank you, Heather. Shall we move to the next question? So the next question is from Matthew, who asks, how is seamless access similar to or different than libkey Nomad?
So I had to do a little bit of searching on this one because I had never heard of libkey Nomad, but what I found was that it's a browser extension for a what looked to be a commercial service. And what it's doing is it's helping do a bit of content discovery, finding the source of an article, and then offering the users an option to an open access copy, or direct the user to an authentication service. It looked like it was the libraries that would be paying for this, but I wasn't really clear on that in the time I had to search for it. Seamless Access does something entirely different than that. We're not into the content discovery component at all. What we're doing is we're helping with identity provider discovery, getting a user, once they're on a service provider site, giving them a clear and consistent way to get to their identity provider, authenticate, and then continue their journey within that service provider. There's a lot of reasons we don't do content discovery. One, it's just outside the problem space we're trying to solve. And two, we're not just actually about libraries and publishers. That's our primary use case. Absolutely, that sort of was the initial driver to all of this. But this can be used for anything that uses federated authentication for logging in. If you're a research community and you want people to have access to your wiki, then Seamless Access will, again, get you through your IDP discovery component. The other thing that's probably worth mentioning that I didn't put in that answer there is Seamless Access is free. There is no, you can thank very much the STM Association, NISO, Internet2, and Géant for basically providing the funding to either in-kind or actual money to pay contractors like me to make the service work, but it's not a for-fee thing that people have to pay to participate in.
Great. And
Jane, can I just add something to that?
Yes, sure.
As well? I won't profess for 1 second to be an expert on libkey, but I guess just thinking about the difference, certainly mechanically, there's obviously a difference as well, because if I think of these like access broker solutions, like Google Casa, like libkey, like EndNote, at the core is, in terms of how they work mechanically, it's IP address. Whereas I suppose that's the clear distinction here. Federated authentication is very much being driven through SAML, so that there's a difference there in terms of the dependency, I suppose. library dependency and what that means from a publisher perspective.
You just made me twitch because you said IP authorization. I'm going to put in a quick plug there's a free STM webinar on July 15th, where I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the browser changes that are happening because the browser vendors, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Firefox, are all feeling the pressure regarding being part of the tracking user problem. And Apple has already, Apple is really strict about this. So you may find with your platforms that oftentimes people coming in through Safari or through iOS or iPadOS, stuff just doesn't quite work. That's because Apple is really, really strict about what they perceive as tools that will allow tracking. And one of the tools they've identified as allowing tracking is IP addresses. So they've started down the path. Right now, it's a subscription only thing for iCloud Plus subscribers. But for iCloud Plus subscribers, they've made it so that the IP address is obfuscated. So this is like a car company where their really expensive cars show the whiz bang fancy features, but over time those features become common and will just be released more and more and more. We're seeing the start of the death of IP address as a tool to be used to identify anybody.
Thank you, Heather. I think that must be quite shocking to a lot of people. We have a question from Frank. So Frank says, one other set of portals would be discovery OPACs, such as OCLC WorldCat or EBSCO Discovery Service. Will there be gateways available through those interfaces for seamless access?
So I wasn't entirely sure how to answer this one because I wasn't as familiar with those technologies. But if I understood the question correctly, the things like OCLC, WorldCat, EBSCO, I think they're doing more than just the federated authentication component of getting a user to an IDP so that they can log in. I think they also have some other features where like the waveless URLs and things like that. And those types of additional things outside of a SAML federation flow are not something that Seamless Access has the capability of supporting. So where services like OCLC and EBSCO do want to have an option to allow federated authentication, absolutely they can use Seamless Access. How they will do that and balance with other options that they have for getting users to data is a fascinating question that I think they'll have to answer.
And maybe I can just add, briefly onto that. A lot of times Seamless Access and GetFTR are mentioned literally in the same breath. And I'm also doing publisher outreach for GetFTR. And the way that I came to kind of understand it is Seamless Access is for instances where the researcher is displaced. They're not on campus, they're somewhere else. And GetFTR, just as an example, is for instances where the researcher is starting their discovery pathway, not in the library. So in some ways, I think of it as like the content is out there. And GetFTR looks at entitlements, real-time entitlements. Seamless Access is not about entitlements. It's simply about the discovery pathway. In terms of discovery services, EDS, for example, there is a GetFTR conversation with many discovery services. We'd love to work with EDS and some in Primo, and the like. So as you can already tell, it's a complex space around authentication and access, and anyone who wants to know more in particular about GetFTR can reach out to me as well for that.
Thank you, Heather. Sorry, Heather, would you like to follow on from there, or
a little bit? When Seamless Access was essentially a glint in our eye. So in other words, back in the RA21 days, the first, we couldn't get past the fact that, okay, so SAML authentication, it had been around for a really long time at that point, close to 2 decades. And yet the first thing users hit was this horrible experience of trying to find their identity provider. So it was always the first thing. That was like the point where everything failed because users said, I don't even know what this is about. And that became our focus. Can we solve that part, that one part? If we can fix that, we unblock and then can figure out the next set of problems that we want to solve. That kept our scope tight and clean. And it is where we are today. We have endeavored to solve that piece of the problem so that we can even make a guess as to, well, then what are the next set of problems that will need to be solved to make federated access a viable tool for institutions of any size. So that's been our blessing to keep it focused. It's also been our curse because people say, okay, well, now this works, but what about? And we don't have answers to the what about yet.
Thank you, Heather. I'd like to ask this question to Jake, if that's okay. So Sarah asks, in essence, is the difference between OpenAthens lookup service and the SeamlessAccess standard implementation service that SeamlessAccess's service only supports EduGain federations and Wayfinder supports EduGain and OpenAthens via a single lookup?
Yeah, so I think as Heather put in her response, the SeamlessAccess service does also look up OpenAthens Federation metadata as well. So the institutions you find in there should be the same. We're all looking at the same bits of data basically to populate that search tool. So it should be the same. I think one thing that again OpenAthens customers use Wayfinder for, which I don't believe the feature of the SeamlessAccess service, is the ability to kind of load in what are called one-to-one connections that aren't part of a federation, which is kind of one of the reasons people might use Wayfinder. So the institutions might be different, but that would be the reason, is that there'll be one-to-one connections within the OpenAthens Wayfinder that wouldn't be within the SeamlessAccess version. But all the other institutions should be the same. We're using the same pots of data.
Thank you, Jake. I have a question for Matt. So Matt, what advice would you give to other publishers wanting to adopt Wayfinder and SeamlessAccess?
I think when we embarked on the journey, I think it became evidently clear right from the get-go that the vast majority of the effort was going to be UI. So I think what I would advise other publishers is to give consideration to, well, are you looking to just improve the federated access user experience? Or is this like an opportunity for you to maybe consider the other pathways, the other customer types that you may be supporting? Because ultimately, when we made the changes to our UI, we had to sort of factor in the other sort of pathways that we offer our other customer types, like individual society members, board members, and give consideration to, because they all use the same interfaces. So I think that would be my sort of first recommendation, because ultimately the thinking around that may determine the best flavor in terms of whether you want to go down the sort of standard integration route or the more advanced, based on the level of control that you're going to need to achieve, based on whatever it is you want to achieve, essentially. So that, I think another thing I would consider is giving thought to measuring success, because as much as we were in a really great position because we use OpenAthens dashboard, we can see, we've got an understanding of the level of logins. So we've got one really great way of being able to sort of understand impact, but there are limitations there in terms of sort of really understanding what that looks like more from a sort of customer level. So again, that's something to consider. Do you have the ability to understand usage via federated authentication? In which case, if you do, then no doubt that would make it much easier to understand what the value is once implemented. So that's another consideration itself.
Thank you, Matt. And just as a follow-on, what are your future plans beyond this integration piece of work in terms of user experience and user journey?
I think from our perspective, the next step is really deciding where we feel is the best, where we would get the best value and deliver the sort of best experience for our customers in terms of where that button's positioned. So when we integrated with Seamless Access, we already had some like sort of real estate that supports these sort of access options that appear on our paywall page. So what we effectively did is just sort of remove the existing options that were available and replace it with the Seamless Access button. But what's not clear to us at this point in time is where we positioned that, is that really offering the best user experience right now to our customers? That's a question we've yet to answer. So that's something that we would like to do. We want to better understand user behavior on IOPscience, obviously try and get some insight from our customers, get more feedback. So to me, that feels like sort of the next step.
Fantastic, thank you, Matt. We have a question from Chris Priest. Is Seamless Access, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Does Seamless Access have any specific technology, or is it simply a convention of how to display the Seamless Access button, for example, using Shibboleth SPs and Wayfinders in the background? Somebody like to answer? Thank you, Heather.
I understand what he's asking. I understand. So it's using a JavaScript API, and all of that is open source. So if you want to review the code, you are more than welcome to do so. I'll drop a link in the chat as to where you can find that.
Thank you very much. So Frank has asked another couple of follow-on questions. So the first question he has asked is around, so another portal which you will be reviewing in another webinar next week, Lean Library integration, will that then become redundant for vendors that make use of Seamless Access? Would anyone like to answer that question?
Yeah, I think that one kind of links back to the question earlier a little bit. Lean Library, which we do also integrate with, it is there kind of handling the discovery part of the journey, whereas, yeah, as you said, Seamless Access is very much around trying to get that authentication experience to be improved. So they definitely don't kind of one doesn't make the other redundant. They sort of work together.
Okay, and then Frank comments that Google Casa is more than IP identification. It includes a trusted link established with the Google account, which, by the way, can be different from your institution email address. Do any of our panel of speakers want to comment further on that one? I believe it uses cookies, for example.
Wait, I lost the question. Where is it?
Q&A. I would say my understanding of Casa, and like Heather, I'm not an expert on it, is you do periodically need to go back to campus to make sure that trusted link is enabled, whereas Seamless Access, you need never go to campus, but that's a small piece. So.
Thank you. And question from Matthew, who says, realistically, if we're in common federation as a member, is that enough to use Seamless Access for IOPscience stuff? Would anyone like to?
I don't see why not. I mean, it's what federation you're in impacts what shows in the list. Does Wayfinder, do you incorporate like EduGain data?
Yeah.
Then it should still work as long as the IDP shows up in your Wayf list, and that IDP has a relationship with the SP in terms of a subscriber model or something like that. Then yeah, that should totally work.
Yeah. It should work. Exactly as you say. Yeah, probably the best way to check is go and see it. I guess the institution you're thinking of is in the Wayfinder on IOP site. Should be there.
I think it's probably worth noting there's one challenge, and this is one of the working groups that SeamlessAccess has underway, and it's got a long and ugly name called the Wave Entry Disambiguation Working Group. And what we're trying to solve is what happens when you have perhaps your campus central IT has an IDP in common, but your library has a membership with another federation like OpenAthens. So it could be any other federation. There's reasons that a library would do that. It depends on the services that the federation offers. But when you get to something that aggregates metadata, then from the user's perspective, they're being presented with this institution twice, and they can't tell the difference. And yet only one of those two will work for any given service provider. So that's where we're actively trying to figure out what kind of recommendation and guidance can we offer to help in that where are you from moment, help the user know which thing is going to work when it looks identical.
And I believe that's the case study that we recently added to SeamlessAccess website.
I think that was from the contract language work. We've got another document that's coming together that shows, 5 different scenarios where this could be a situation where you would see what looks like the same thing twice, or something in the wave that would be confusing to the end user.
Thank you. I have a question around sort of expected sort of setup times. So just asking our panel there what the typical setup times are for both the SeamlessAccess service and for Wayfinder. Matt may also indicate, how long it took to set up. I mean, it may have taken a little bit longer, I guess, as you were testing the integration, but yeah, would the panel like to talk to that question?
It depends. It entirely depends. From SeamlessAccess's perspective, which integration model are you trying to do? If you're doing something advanced, where you're doing some magic with the discovery service, and you're going to have a very different experience in terms of how much time does it take to implement this than if you're doing a standard integration where you just need to drop in a URL. So it also depends on, are you familiar with federation at all? Have you ever put together a federated identity support, or is this entirely new for you? So lots of it depends, unfortunately.
Yeah, sure.
Jake
or Matt.
Sorry, just to add on to that, Jane, with that in mind, we recommend that folks who are considering implementing SeamlessAccess reach out to us, even if they're still in the sort of formative stage, because we can point them to parts of the documentation when there are wireframes or mock-ups. We can give advice based on conversations that we've had and kind of best practices. We don't want to hear that everything's ready to go and you are planning on launching tomorrow and you didn't know that you were going to get in touch with us. That's not good. So err on the side of caution and get in touch with us too early rather than that. And if you use a hosting platform, they have some implementations, that they've set up for out of the box, but we still want to hear from you and go through that. So please reach out. And sorry about that, Jane.
No, that's fine. I was just going to ask if Jake or Matt had anything to add to the question around setup times.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out from working with IOP, and I guess speaking to the timeline things as well, is how much kind of UI work you might need to do on your side in terms of, you may just put the button on your site and not change anything else, but I think as IOP did, and I think as we probably recommend, is try and think about how you can improve the journey more completely. And again, depending on how much work you need to do there and how long that takes, that can obviously add to the time, obviously produces a better experience on the other side.
Thank you. If there's any more questions, if people could please post them in the Q&A chat. Otherwise, I think we might be coming to an end for the questions. Just having a look through the chat now to see if there's any that have posted in there instead.
I will put in a plug. Heather plugged the browser webinar for Get FTR. We are having a publisher webinar on July 14th. And that you can find that on the STM page if you want to register for that, or you can reach out to me and I can point you.
I think that concludes our questions now. So if there aren't any more, please do reach out to our panel of speakers. So thanks again to all of our speakers. I just want to draw your attention to a few resources that you might find useful. So the first one is the NICE approved recommended practices for improved access to institutionally provided information resources. So that is available on the NICE website. We also have a couple of OpenAthens resources on UX recommendations. So we have a blog and also a webinar recording. So those will be made available to everyone who's attended. And just want to say a huge thanks to all of our speakers. And I do encourage you to reach out to Heather, Jake, and Matt if you are interested in implementing Wayfinder or Seamless Access. And I think Matt's also quite happy to talk about his experiences. So please do get in touch with Matt. So I think that ends our webinar for today. Thank you everyone for attending. And thank you again to all of our speakers.